At present, due to COVID-19 and many other factors, Sri Lanka's growth has declined. But what have been the main drivers of Sri Lanka's growth in the past? Over the years, our growth has been driven primarily by investment in non-tradables. When we say non-tradables, we mean sectors such as construction and public services, which you cannot trade. Now, relying on non-tradables only can be tricky. A country like ours has a small economy, and unlike our neighboring countries, our domestic market, that is our local consumer base, is just not large enough to be the sole driver of economic growth. What we need is a strong international trading regime that can help address this problem. Meaning, in order to increase prosperity and achieve sustainable growth in the long term, Sri Lanka needs to increase and promote trade. How do we do this? Being internationally competitive is essential, and to do so, we need to have higher productivity. Let's take a look at how trade has helped other countries grow. Trade as a percentage of GDP of the world, according to the World Bank, was 26.5% in 1970. By 2019, it had increased to 58.2%. If you take a look at our neighboring countries such as Vietnam and Thailand, their growth can be attributed largely to trade. When considering trade as a percentage of GDP of these countries, the trend is one of sustained growth. In Thailand, it was 75.8% in 1990 and increased to around 110% in 2019. In Vietnam, it was 81.3% in 1990 and 210% in 2019. These are increases of over 45% and 158% respectively. However, in Sri Lanka, it is 68.2% in 1990 and has actually dropped to 52.3% in 2019. This is in stark contrast to the increase that we see in Thailand and Vietnam. Sri Lanka's trade percentage relative to GDP has been comparatively lower over the past decade. So the question is, why are we not capitalizing on trade to develop our economy? Sri Lanka's policies could be holding us back from growing through trade. One such barrier is our tariff system. To understand how tariffs stand in the way of our trade, let's understand what tariffs are. In simple terms, they are taxes on imports. Tariffs raise the price of their imported competitor products, giving a price advantage to locally produced goods. Tariffs also raise revenue for the government. Sri Lanka has a tariff system that is both complicated and opaque. In addition to standard general duties on imports, Sri Lanka has additional tariffs known as para-tariffs. Two para-tariffs currently in use are the Ports and Airports Levy, or the PAL, and the cess. Para-tariffs increase overall tariff rates as they are calculated on top of the general duty. For example, if a good is taxed at 15% general duty, 8% VAT, 10% PAL, and 15% cess, one would assume that the total tax is 48%. But actually, because of the way para-tariffs are calculated, the total tax is 53.6%. To sustain a good open trading regime, moving away from para-tariffs to a transparent and predictable tariff regime is crucial. Sri Lanka's effectively applied simple average tariff in 2017 was 10.35% according to the World Bank. In comparison, the regional average of East Asia and the Pacific was 4.46% in 2017, and the world average was 4.97%. In addition, the COVID-19 pandemic had a significant impact on Sri Lanka's trade. Earnings from exports decreased by 15.9% to approximately $10 billion in 2020. The Sri Lankan government introduced import restrictions in the form of temporary bans, quotas, and increased tariff rates at the start of the pandemic. As highlighted in the Central Bank Annual Report, a combination of import restrictions and the impact of the pandemic on the global economy led to a drop in import expenditure. Expenditure on imports reduced by 19.5% to approximately $16 billion in 2020. This decline was seen across intermediate goods, investment goods, and non-food consumer goods. The issues of import restrictions and pursuing a path of inefficient import substitution will be explored in greater detail in episode 2 of Advocata Deep Dive Primer and Discussion. Now, we have taken a look at the history of Sri Lanka's trade and some key trade policies. But who are our main trading partners? In 2020, China was Sri Lanka's main trading partner, with trade with China, India, and the US combined accounting for around 40% of Sri Lanka's total trade. Total trade with these three countries amounted to USD 10.5 billion in 2020, a decline in comparison to 2019's figure of USD 12.6 billion. When you're speaking of international trade, you are essentially speaking of imports and exports. Looking at imports, China is the main market from which imports have been sourced in 2020, with an estimated 22% of imports originating from China. Other two main import source destinations were India and the EU, which accounted for 19% and 9% of imports, respectively, as reported by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. The European Commission reports also state similar percentages in regards to import, with India's share being 18.8% and the EU 27 being 8%. Looking at exports, the USA and EU 27 countries have continued to be Sri Lanka's main export destinations in 2020. While the USA is Sri Lanka's single largest buyer of exports, accounting for 24.9% of the country's exports, it is followed by the EU 27 that accounts for 23% of the country's exports. Further, looking at the European Commission's reports in regards to exports, the percentages are very similar, with it being 24.6% and 22.7% respectively. The Generalized Scheme of Preferences, better known as GSP Plus of the European Union, is a trade agreement that removes the import duties of goods that enter the EU market. The GSP Plus scheme is conditional on Sri Lanka advancing human and labour rights and working towards sustainable development. Sri Lanka has enjoyed the benefits of GSP Plus from 2005 to 2010, and we regained it in May 2017. With EU countries contributing to a significant percentage of Sri Lanka's exports, the benefits of having GSP Plus are significant. However, with recent conversation regarding GSP Plus being removed once again, exporters are worried. To conclude, if Sri Lanka plans to see substantial growth, improved trade will be essential. For this, improving our trade policy is of the utmost importance. To know more about Sri Lanka's trade policy and its way forward, head over to our Deep Dive Episode 2 with Dr. Sarath Rajapatirana, Academic Chair of the Advocata Institute. If you'd like to stay informed and updated about Sri Lanka's economy with Advocata, subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell icon below to receive notifications.